Frank Greeff, how are you, mate?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Mate, it's a pleasure. I was just thinking before, I'm pretty sure the first time I come across you was like a headline on social media. I think it was a video that popped up or an article, and it was something along the lines of Frank Greeff sells business for $180 million. dollars. And I remember my first thought, incredibly wrong thought, but my first thought was there must be a lot of money in drink bottles and keep cups. And, and then it clicked to me, completely different business. But maybe even a, go on, sorry.
I was just gonna say there's probably even more money in that, to be honest.
You're probably right, especially the amount of Frank Green bottles you see getting around these days. But it's funny because you were kind of in the real estate space, which is a space I'm familiar with. I've worked in the industry on and off over the course of the last 6 years. And your business, Realbase, was a real estate marketing company. Am I correct?
Yeah, essentially. So, like to summarize it in like 15 seconds, is we're an online marketplace. So we're a two-sided marketplace selling to real estate agents and connecting them with real estate suppliers. So every time a property sells in Australia and New Zealand, you order 10 different suppliers. We facilitated that transaction through the online platform.
And so, that's an interesting business because I guess most people think of real estate and they think of the traditional space to be in and selling the house to the consumer, or they think of the big businesses like Domain who acquired your business or realestate.com, one of those kind of entities. But to be in that business feels like quite a specific decision. Was it for you born out of a problem? Were you in the space or in the industry previously and identified an opportunity or a problem to solve? Or was it kind of you fell into the real estate space off the back of the ideas that you had?
So it's probably like a bit of column A and a bit of column B. My brother, he was a real estate photographer. So he was kind of like dabbling in that world and shooting photography for real estate agents. And he saw an opportunity where some of those real estate agents were asking for signboard delivery because their current supplier was not doing a good job. And so he just said, like, should we start a company physically installing these signboards? And so that was our kind of foray into the industry, which was very boring and not very sexy. It was literally printing off signboards and installing them in houses. So that the idea of what ended up being the eventuation of what got sold was really predicated on the idea of we learnt the process, we learnt the problems, and then we saw that actually by creating technology, we didn't have to be the one doing the service. We could instead facilitate the service through the platform.
And so to come up with that idea and, the tech side of things is often something I struggle with. I'm not great with tech. And I know some people are, some aren't. For you at the time, did it feel like there was a mountain to climb to understand that side of the business and to be able to solve that problem for people?
So it's really interesting when you start as a services based company. Like I've recently had I've spoken to a guy who did almost the exact same thing, but in a different world. So he started an internet and a website agency where they built website for people who wanted websites, and then he realized actually the process of building websites is completely wrong and backwards. Let's build a tech company to solve that problem. We're very much the same. Like because we did 4 years of printing brochures and installing signboards, it was only through that process did we learn all the inefficiencies. So if you were to say, like, you start tomorrow, you got a piece of paper, come up with a tech idea and let's go, like that's the mountain to climb. But with 4 years of seeing the problem every single day, it becomes really crystal clear around what is the problem you need to solve. And then that's the lucky piece that I couldn't take any credit for is my brother taught himself how to become a software engineer. And so he was the one who physically wrote the code. So the mountain was far greater for him to climb. I just focused on installing signboards while he was writing that code until we pivoted into the tech piece.
So it was the three of you, right? Three brothers?
Yeah, myself, Jacques, and Ken. So Ken being the eldest and Jacques being the middle brother.
So when you guys sit down and you go, okay, we feel like we can solve this problem and we feel like we can add value as a service-based business, was there any inkling to the size and the sheer scale of business that you thought you could build? Because to sell for $180 million, dollars, that's why it's a headline, right? Because it's crazy. Most people can't imagine that amount of money. Most people have never met somebody who's dealt with a company of that size in their life. And so to see that figure, you almost like, for me personally, as someone who's like quite an optimist and quite a believer, I think, I wonder if Frank could see the scale that was potentially ahead of him, or whether you've seen a way to provide value and then were surprised by the end result.
I feel like it's going to be a trend, a bit of column A, a bit of column B. We definitely were delusionally ambitious. So like, we were, a story I share many times is, we're installing the signboards and we're talking about, one day when this business, we're doing $50 million worth of business. Like we just, for whatever reason, delusionally thought it was going to be at some kind of scale, but there was no map to it. There's no Excel spreadsheet modeling why I was going to get there, but it was just like we had really big ambitions. So we always knew it was going to be big, but we had no pathway to get there. And so I think that, like, how it kind of eventuated was more around, because we knew it was going to be big. We didn't take any dividends for 7 years. We reinvested every dollar, because it wasn't like, oh, we better take 100 grand this year because we better start getting some of this cash. It was like, well, if we take 100 grand, then we're not going to be able to grow to the next stage, so we better just go again. And so like, we always had these big ambitions, but I think it definitely wasn't like, here's 180, here's how we reverse engineer it, here's the step-by-step process. We just weren't that sophisticated. I was 20 years old when we started, so we were making the shit up as we went.
Mate, I love that. So how long were you in business for?
So from day dot to when I'll say air quotes retired, which is I finished up a domain, the company that bought us 3 weeks ago. It was a 12-year journey. From the time we sold, it was 10 years. So 10 years, which, looking back, you're like, wow, that's really quick. But when you're in the middle of you're in year 7 and you still haven't taken the profit, like the 10 years feels like an eternity, to have that same kind of problems that you're solving almost every single day.
And you say that, right? You mentioned that 10 years when you're in it feels a lot longer. It certainly seems very quick. If for the average consumer who's seeing you on social media the last couple of years, they're hearing you tell the story, they're watching your content, they're seeing the amazing things that you're doing now. They certainly aren't aware of the fact that it was a 10-year business. It's certainly the iceberg analogy that applies, because it almost feels like a 2-year success story, right? And it's really interesting to think about that 10 years. I was sitting at work yesterday and I had this thought around, there are days, mate, where I get so jittery when I'm at work and I'm working my regular job, because I love this so much and I love what I do in the speaking world and the storytelling world so much. I'm so passionate about it and I just want to do more of it and I want to sink my teeth into it. And I would love to be in the shoes of, I can do the thing that I love every day and rock up enthusiastically and create a living off the back of it to support my future family and my partner and I right now. And I sat there and I was just journaling through that thought and that feeling a little bit, because I'm in that space at the moment of trying to remind myself that it's not always all it's cracked up to be, and enjoy the moment I'm in right now, make the most of it, be enthusiastic every day. But I wonder for you, like when you were in that 10 years and you're in the thick of it and you're sacrificing at the time to reinvest into the company and you're going through the struggles and you're not seeing the result that you'd like to see or know that you could be seeing in a couple of years' time, how were you sitting in that thought and what was the feeling at that point in time? And how many times did you have to recenter yourself back into the knowledge and the knowing that just enjoy it and embrace it right now?
Oof, good question. I couldn't tell you how many times. All I could tell you, it was really consistent, right? So it's like the game. The game of business is like the highest highs and the lowest lows, all the time, right? So it's like, you win a big deal. When I was doing sales for the business, you win a big deal, you're riding the rush, you're like, yes, we've got it. And then the deal eventuates and now you onboard the client and then the client's first complaint comes in, you're like, oh my God, what have we done? And like there used to be these spaces of like 2 weeks, and some of those highs are really, really great, like as $1 million client, and some of them are so low that it's like you've lost your first client, or you've had a key person leave, or there was a time there where we had 4 weeks of liquidity left and we went, okay, in 4 weeks we are bankrupt. Right. And so and the context when you're bootstrapping is not like, oh no, I got to go back to my investors and say sorry. It's like, oh no, I can't get a mortgage for 5 years because I filed for bankruptcy and I own nothing and I live in a rental apartment. Fuck. So it happened all the time. But I guess I kind of was lucky that like there is so much camaraderie in business, and where I was really fortunate is that I love co-founders. Like I think like I'm real bullish on that. And like you could ask, Frank, now that you've done that with 2 people, could you go do it yourself? I'm like, yeah, I could, but like man, it's fun winning together. It's so fun winning with someone. Like even what I'm doing now with the cookbook and the podcast, I'm doing it with someone, and like we share it on the wins. So the camaraderie itself keeps you kind of grounded and keeps you enjoying the moment, because it's 6, 7 p.m. at night. You've been there since 5 a.m. that morning. It's really hot in your factory because it's like summer and you can't afford aircon. So this sounds ridiculous, but whatever. The boys are shirtless, they're sweating, and they're folding brochures. Yeah, and we're having a laugh. We're having a laugh while we're doing it. Obviously, that's before we had HR and things like that, and it's when you can do those kind of things. But it's those little moments that you look back at now and we smile and we laugh. And it's those little moments that bring me, that are a magnet to attract me to do it again, because the reality is, like, if it's just a financial number next time, it's not as exciting. But I'm like, but those moments where you're spitballing, you come up with an idea, and then you see that idea eventuate, and you're like, that was my hypothesis, and it was true, and you're like, yes, and you get to share like that's the stuff, and that's the stuff that grounds you in like just being there, because it's the, again, you type in my name into Google, great. The headline is the same headline everywhere else. It's 180 mil, great. But the part that it doesn't tell is like the journey of the person that you become, and that's the part that's like, that's the intangible. That's the part that it's like you can't put a dollar value on like who you were when you entered and who you were when you left. You fundamentally shifted as a person. You created amazing relationships and connections. That's some of the special magic that it's like real hard to replicate in anything else.
Well, that's the beauty behind this, right? Is you get to fill in the gaps of the intangibles that people don't understand or see. Because you're right, it's so easy to track the tangible things, and for most people in business, that seems to land on money because it is the easiest thing to track, to stack, to talk about. A lot of people, especially in times like these, economically challenging times, where people feel like they're short of the coin and they need more of it, that is the story that sells, because people connect with it and they can sense how life-changing that would be. And to speak of that, I guess life change or life. Go on, sorry.
Saying, don't get me wrong. I also don't want to sound like the guy and everyone's like, yeah, like shut up. Like the cash is good. don't get me wrong. The cash is a great thing.
Bloody oath.
Like that's the obvious part. Like that's the obvious part. If it's a wave a magic wand and tomorrow the business sells for 180, but you don't have to go through the journey. Like the reality is like the journey is so important to that. Because also you wouldn't even know how to spend, you wouldn't even know what to do with it, and you'll probably go bankrupt because you never learnt the discipline which is required to have money and to be able to like use it wisely. Because I can tell you one thing, it's really hard to make money and it is so easy to spend it. I was real lucky. At the end of the deal, I connected with a guy who'd sold his business for 600 million, and he said to me something super wise. He goes, the game now is how to get the money from your pocket into their pocket. And he goes, I once sold a business, made 20 million. He said, I spent it in 3 years. And I literally then from that moment tracked it. I was like, man, like if I said yes to every opportunity that came through my desk, you can spend it in 12 months. Like I had an AFR article last week, and I've had 35 to 40 LinkedIn contacts, and every single one, like 95%, I would say, is a strike rate. Either I'm a wealth manager, I'll hold your cash and invest it, or here's in my investment opportunity, here's my slide deck. Like hands down, that's all. It's just like, so yeah, it's easy to spend. So you got to learn the skill set to not.
So let me ask you that skill set, or almost like what's the filter to look at opportunity now and look at the years ahead of you and wisely spend that money?
Nice, good. So it's interesting because I've spoken to a few different founders, had their exits or had withdrawn some significant capital from their businesses, because they made their money in the process of founding a business. They kind of almost see themselves and other people when those opportunities come, and therefore they're quite bullish on early stage investments. I couldn't be further from that. I saw the journey, I saw the time, energy, and effort, and so my thing is I'm hyper risk adverse. So I although I could be missing out on the next Canva, like who knows? Like one of the 35 could be the next Canva, seeing my inbox, and I could be saying, oh, that's private jet cash, cool. But the risk to reward ratio in my eyes is not really worthwhile, because like, yeah, you could have a B next to your name, but the other alternative is you lose the family home, like, right? So like my filter is what is the risk to reward ratio here? And like I would rather take much safer bets. Like for example, like I'm pretty open with this kind of stuff. I'm happy to talk about money. It doesn't worry me. I took majority of the cash. I spread it across maybe 300 different assets. Some of them as boring as hedge bets to inflation, a share in a fishery farm in New Zealand. Right, like really, really random, boring, stuff like that, or like private debt, all these different like investment vehicles. Because it's like, okay, how do I make sure that that's there forever? Because I'd rather have the surety of that than risk it big. And that means like you look at someone like Elon Musk, he did PayPal and he put it all on the line, and that's why he's Elon Musk, right? Like if he didn't put it all on the line, he wouldn't be where he is today. But my like want for that is I'm quite conscious that there comes a number where anything additional there is not going to move the needle in terms of happiness. But I can assure you, if I went from having the comfortability to nothing, I will be the negativity bias in the human mind will be far stronger than oh yeah, I've got another zero next to my name. How good.
You hit the ball over the net before. You said that you won't lie and say that the money isn't nice because it helps, right? And I certainly agree with that. I don't personally feel super motivated by money. And I've tested that because I'm in a sales job, right? And I find the idea of making the next 100 calls for the cash doesn't necessarily motivate me. I'm more intrinsically motivated and motivated in different ways. But I will say, certainly the idea of being able to support a family and have adventures and experiences excites the hell out of me and really drives me. And I wonder for you, Frank, when you think about that money that you've been able to secure through the business and you think about your life moving forward, what are the things that really excite you or drive you for the fact that you can do that now because you've been able to acquire the sale of your business?
Probably first and foremost is like freedom to the concerns of money. So I think there's a real powerful piece in which like I'm real fortunate. I don't have to have like the stress of day-to-day stuff. Like I don't have to worry about the groceries or the coffee. The coffee is now $5.10 instead of $4.90. So that stuff's really nice because like those are the baseline stresses. That I know what that felt like because it was only like 2 years ago. So for everybody's context, I'm hoping people are like, oh, shut up, this guy needs cash. He's talking about no. I know because it was only 2 years ago, and it was about 4 years ago. I was on $700 a week. So like I'm real crystal clear. I know I've spent a lot more of my life earning below the standard of Australia. So I know what it is like there. So the freedom of that. Then the freedom of my own diary, the freedom of my life is really critical. So for me, my wife went back to work because she's a clinical psychologist. She absolutely loves the job, which is helping people. And I love her for that. And so she's like, I want to go back to work because of that. And so what that means is every second Tuesday, it's daddy daycare. I look after my son while she's at work. Mondays and Tuesdays, I pick him up from daycare and we go and jump on a trampoline. Like that's sick. Like that's the stuff I really like. And then beyond that, it's like, okay, cool. What else? And so the things that get me real jazzed up and excited is I don't have to quantify every interaction I have. And I did have to in business. So in business, I had to, anytime it was someone wanting time out of my diary because I had co-founders and I had to think about like, yes, this might be an interesting conversation, but is this interesting conversation worth my taking time out of work, or am I doing a disservice to my brothers? And often the answer is yes. And so therefore I had to kind of quantify to myself, that is not worth your time and worth your money. Where now I go like, it doesn't really matter. Like it's all good. So if there's an interesting person I meet and I want to go have lunch with them, I can go do that. And that's really cool. But the last piece, which is like probably the most exciting, is like, okay, how do I use the skills beyond myself? So not self-serving interest, but like help others. And so like that's what I'm doing with the cookbook. Like I'm doing a cookbook for high performance people who are health conscious, time poor, and 100% of that revenue goes to charity. So 100% of the revenue that I'm going to generate. So I've got a goal of $1 million. They're going to go to children's cancer. Now I can only do that because one, I have enough money to fund the process, which is the cost of building, marketing, and selling the cookbook. But number two is because I don't have to have a job that pays money. I have the freedom to go like I'm going to spend 30 hours on this thing a week, but it doesn't need to bring in bacon. But then apart from that, it's also like the skills I can transfer. So I was only with a guy this morning. He's got an awesome business, and I just do like kind of mentoring, advisoring, and I do that with a lot of different people. I always have to like caveat this because after some of the podcasts, then get reached out by like 50 people to say, "Hey, can you be my mentor?" I'm pretty. I don't do it with more than like 10 at a time, and the reason I do that is because I want to give those people like my all rather than just have like 50. I'm not going to become an online guru guy. That's just not me. I do it because I love being able to like instill help and essentially shorten people's time horizon to get skills. And then again, I don't have to quantify that. I don't have to go like, this was a dollar productive session. It was more like, this helped this individual grow their business and their smile was electric and I was so pumped and they showed me the impact it made in the business. I'm like, yes. So I think those are all the things that excite me, and that I think that's why I go, don't get me wrong, I love the cash, because it allows me to do those things.
For sure. And I love your honesty there. I appreciate that. I want to say, you mentioned there that one of the beauties of post-sale is that you don't have to quantify your time anymore. I find this to be a really interesting conversation because for me personally, and this might be different for everyone depending on how you're wired, but for me personally, the more I tend to quantify my time, the more challenging, or I guess maybe that's not the word, the more rushed I feel. So if my day is super set out and super itemized and super scheduled, I feel like I'm rushing through my life. And I've had this feeling lately. Part of it is I respect the fact that I'm an employee and I've got an amazing boss and I've got a great team that I work with in the real estate space who give me a little bit of flexibility and freedom to pick my day during the week to record the podcast. And as long as I'm showing up at work and providing value on those other 5 days, they're happy. But knowing that I have to clock in at 9, by 9 every morning and hopefully finish by 5, so I can get home to my partner and make dinner and have a night together, there is an element of me at times that feels like there's so much outside of my work day that I want to fit into my life that I feel like I'm always rushing. And I notice that for me, the looser I get with my time and the more I allow myself to naturally flow into my day, the more I seem to get done, the more productive I am, the happier I am. Now, I know this isn't the reality for most of people who are listening to the show because they have to clock in and clock out at work. But I wonder if you relate to that in any sense.
I always like to relate to the host because I want to build rapport, but also you want me to be honest. I'm the opposite.
100% I do.
Yeah, so I'm the opposite because I find that if I don't have an amount of structure and if I don't compress things, things will take as long as they're in there for. So, for example, if I have 3 meetings, somehow that day I only got to fit in 3 meetings. But if I have 10 things back to back, somehow I just crush those 10 things. So, and this is more specifically to when I'm in business. So I guess like from like people listening either in their jobs or in sales or creating a business, I'm a big believer. There's a reason the saying is, if you want something done, ask a busy person. Because for me, when I'm busier, I then become more ruthless in my ability to execute because I know that I have like, for example, like when I was the final years of being CEO in Realbase, like there would be, my EA would block in sometimes be like, I could only find 15 minutes in your diary to have the food. It's for you to be able to eat food. And that would be like the moment I enter to the moment I leave. It's disgusting, but like I was incredibly productive because I just knew that like I didn't have a second to waste. It's not it's not necessarily longevity, but that's just maybe it's like the psychopath in my brain that needed that kind of they needed that kind of structure. Apologies that I couldn't agree personally on that one.
No, well, and it's really interesting for me because I feel like I've gone through phases in my life. There was a time where I really liked that. And I don't know what the change has been for me personally. Maybe it's the fact that I had a little bit more of a taste of freedom the last couple of years, that I've acquired a real love for it and a craving for a little bit more freedom. And I think it is more so in my personal life. I hate being rushed with the people that I love and with the things that really fill me with a sense of passion and enthusiasm. But this is part of the balance and the challenge of life, right? You don't always get to run by your own clock. And it's, I guess, part of the inspiration behind building things, businesses like you have, or media channels like I'm trying to create, so that I can do more of the things that I love more frequently. And maybe then I'd be happy if I was doing a couple podcasts a week and I had a bunch of stuff that was related to this business. Maybe I'd be more happy with the schedule. Maybe it would be more enjoyable. You never know until you're there.
Totally. Yeah, that makes sense.
So talk to me about, the cookbook. Obviously cooking has been a passion of yours forever. The fact that you get to do it for a very noble cause now is, I'm sure, exciting. Where did that love begin?
So the love for cooking is really interesting because it's I can't actually remember when it happened. It's just as long as I can remember, I loved it. That's it. Like so, like my first memories of like school is like I'm 9 years old, and there's a class that were baking some kind of chocolate brownie, and I just remember absolutely frothing. Like I couldn't pinpoint when. All I can pinpoint is the sum total of all of my energy during my high school days was how do I become a better chef. So I had three jobs. I worked at a cafe washing dishes. I worked at a cafe in the kitchen. I worked in a restaurant in the kitchen. So it was like Thursday night, Thursday night, Saturday morning, Sunday morning. And so I'd do that the whole way through school. I did food technology. I did advanced hospitality. I did hospital. So it's just like everything I did was for that love of cooking.
So when you talk about that love, obviously as a young man, whilst at school, it sounds like you had an incredible work ethic then, like to go from school to the kitchen to be in that industry. And that's a hard working industry, right? Like you speak to people in the hospitality and the restaurant space, the pressure is on, you're literally sweating in there. It's a pressure cooker. And you're in the business of, making sure that things are getting done to a standard consistently. How much do you think that actually reflects on the work ethic you have now?
A great deal of it, like a great deal of it. So the reason I had a strong work ethic is because I had incredible role models in my parents. So my parents had an unbelievable work ethic when we were growing up, and so like that's just what I knew life looked like. Now, not to the degree where I'm in high school and I don't see dad until the last 10 minutes of the day, but it was more like everything they did was about wheeling and dealing. It was like they finished work, we're having dinner as a family. It's talking numbers, it's talking this, it's talking about deals, talking about opportunities. So it was always a thing in their world, and then obviously that rubbed off on me. But then also I'll be real honest. During high school, I didn't get pocket money or anything because like we didn't have much cash as a family, and I loved being independent. Sonny and me I just wanted to be independent. I just thought it was so cool. so I wanted to have cash to use at the canteen. so like that was a big driver for me to why I worked, is because like I wanted to be able to have my own money and be able to do my own things. But then what I learned in the 3 years, like as a proper chef doing 60 hours a week, like I learned what real hard work looks like. I learned what, like as close to sleep deprivation and not having breaks. And, I drove an hour to work, an hour home. So I'd be driving at 5 a.m. I'd be driving home at 10:30, 11, depends on the night. Some night, like I remember one night we got smashed in the service. So the service was just unbelievably busy, and it meant I couldn't get all my prep work done for the next day. And I didn't want to stitch up my partner who was coming the next day. So there's like a bit of a spoken code in the kitchen. It's like if you got a partner that when you're on your 2 days off, you don't want to stitch them up because it's the wrong thing to do because I'll stitch you up next week. So I stayed back until like 3:30 a.m. Scaling and filleting fish. Like you're not getting paid for that. I'm on 36 grand a year, but you do it because it's like about the camaraderie. It's about not letting that person down. And so like that was like my start of my career. That was probably the biggest skill I picked up from the kitchen days, was just like work hard. And so bringing that into business, it was definitely a superpower that I can kind of keep rolling in.
You've mentioned that word a couple of times now, the camaraderie, and I love that because I think we live in a society now where we've fooled ourselves to think that we're more connected than we actually are. we're online all the time, and we're sitting here right now recording a virtual podcast. If you're watching this, you'll know that. If you're listening, you may not be aware, but we're connected right now. But it certainly doesn't equate to the same feeling as if we were in the same room and we're sitting here eye to eye, face to face, having a conversation. There's something to be said for that. In your life right now, you spoke about partnering with people on opportunities and businesses. You're obviously very close with your wife, and you've got a son and a beautiful family unit. How important is it for you outside of those things, though, to have that camaraderie with friends, connections, and to be connecting consistently?
It's like my third layer of everything. So like for me, it's like in no priority of order, but it's like I love business, food, my family, and then like the social aspect, which is the camaraderie. I literally 5 days a week I'm training, so weights training. 3 to 5 days a week I'm running, and 80% of those sessions will be with someone and someone different. So this morning I did a run in the city. I'm with a good friend of mine. He's also in business. We're chatting business all the way through. Yesterday morning I'm with an awesome friend who's not in business, but he's in sales. And so like I'll stack my week. My training is with someone different. So at the end of a week, I'll be training with usually 3 to 4 different people, because it's just like I get to chat, spitball, whatever. Because it's just so important. Like, it's critical for me. Like I am a social beast, but with the change of family dynamics, like I'm not going out on a Saturday night. You know what I mean? I'm not hitting the club. I'm not hitting the pub. Like I'm at home. I'm with my wife. I'm with my son. I'm doing exactly what I want to do. But then I miss out on that social aspect. So that's how I stack it into my training. But I'm a bit of a freak. Like if it goes 2 days without, with one of the boys chats, it's nothing's blowing up. I'm sending a voice note. I'm trying to stir up some encouragement. I'm trying to get the boys all fired up. Like I thrive on it. It's between meetings. I've got, I do calls like before this podcast, but between my last meeting, I'm on a 30-minute conversation with my, one of my brothers, just chatting and spitballing. Like I think it's so critical. It just and I've been that way for a long time.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you had a close-knit family unit, which I think certainly helps that. I'm similar. I've been blessed to have one of the biggest blessings in my life, Frank, is from the moment I was old enough to recognize it, I've always had incredible people around me. I'm so lucky for that because I thrive off those connections, and I thrive off being able to sit down with the boys. We have a regular Wednesday morning run, coffee, and mate, we are hard pressed to fit that into 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
We have to meet so early in the morning because it's like there's so much to chat about, to catch up on the week. We're all throwing ideas in. We love to connect on these deep, meaningful conversations, and it's one of the greatest blessings of my life. And I can see that you share that feeling for your connections and your people, and especially, as I'm sure you can relate to, when you're going through those more challenging times, like you would have in business, like we all do in life, to have those people to lean on, and for them to be able to lean on you when they need it too. It's so important.
It's so good. It's so good. My friends have seen the best, the worst, and everything in between. You got to have I can only speak on behalf of a man because that's what I am. As a man, I need that. You know what I mean? I need to be able there's certain things that you can for me I can talk to with my boys and with my boy one on one. I need that in my life.
Yeah, for sure. I think there was actually some research that come out around men's mental health and how it's advised that guys have, well, they say 2 guys nights, but whether that's, for someone like me and my mates, it's more 2 guys mornings a week, and those opportunities to connect with your mates, really important. Hey, I want to go back to business for a moment, and your business in particular. There's that Jim Carrey quote that I'm sure most people are familiar with, that I wish everyone could have everything they've ever dreamed of in life to realise that it's not the answer. I wonder, was there anything prior to your business being successful, acquiring that sale, and then now the life that you're living, that you had in your head built up to say, hey, once I have money and I have success, this won't be a problem anymore, that you were still shocked with the problem and the challenge of?
So it's real interesting that you say that, right? And I think I'm lucky, but also was very intentional with this. I consumed a lot of content, and probably specifically in those final couple of years before the deal, which was, what is it going to look like on the other end of this? What's on the precipice where other people have done this, and what can I learn from them? And that was the most common theme, which was, mate, your dopamine's going to reset. You're going to have a sweeter car. You're going to have a sweet house, but shit's still going to happen, and you're going to feel just like you did when you didn't have those things. And so I learned that there isn't going to be I'll be happy when. Like I just knew that wasn't the case, because I was like, there was enough data points there. There wasn't someone else who was like, nah, like, nah, that's not true. All your problems will be gone. You know, that whole like quote, I'd rather be crying in my Lambo than crying in my Corolla. Like, fuck off. Like no. So I knew that wasn't the case. And so therefore I had no expectations, inflated expectations of what was going to be. So therefore I had nothing that could let me down. I think, and so like you raising that quote and the people listening today, is like you're listening to the right stuff, because that's kind of what I was consuming, and it was the right message. And you have to hear it from people who have done it and been through it. And again, I always come back and anchor it with, I love it, it's great, it's amazing, I'm stoked that it happened. But it's like if you're unhappy on that journey, you'll be unhappy on the end of it, because that wasn't the problem. That wasn't the problem you were solving for. I had a guy on my podcast, Chew the Fat, called David Shane, and David Shane has sold his business for $1 billion, and then he said the following year he went through the deepest depression of his life. And unfortunately for David, he sold in the year 2000. There wasn't podcasts. There wasn't, there was probably nowhere where you could get that kind of advice. So you would have this, this thinking that at the other end of this, it's just going to be ridiculous. And then you go through it and you lose your purpose, you lose your passion. You go, cool, his bank account has all these zeros. And he's like, fuck, like, oh, maybe the magic was back there, and I've just sold the magic.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? And you were lucky enough, well, not lucky enough, but intentional enough to become aware of that before you sold. When you speak about that realization and what you've been consuming in the content and the advice you'd heard from people who had walked the path that you were about to, do you think was the actual skill set in just changing the mindset towards it, or were there actual things that you implemented into your life at that point in time to start to prepare yourself for life now?
Interesting. I think like deep down inside I knew it. Like I knew that it intuitively feels right, but I needed like the confirmation to get me there. So I don't think I made a great deal of changes, but the one thing I probably did was like, some of the times in your mind are like kind of like you wish you could fast forward, like, so, as we talk today, talking about that transition from like, I kind of, would I be kind of happier or different if I could transition out of the sales and make this my full time? And then you have those thoughts, and then you kind of overlay it with like, but just remember this is part of it. Because like you only know what good is when you felt bad. So you'll only be excited when you have only the podcast to worry about, when you had a time where you had to squeeze in the podcast and sales, right? So like you need to go through that to make this side really exciting. And so I think it was more about that. It was more like in those moments, just like reminding myself, like, it's okay. Like it's all gonna, it all makes sense, so then I get to come here and share the stories about being shirtless and folding brochures, because like those are the fun things that then, but if I went like fast forward from that, like you don't have any of those cool little memories and anchors and moments.
Yes, it's so interesting. I think I heard you speak about this with Chris, because I listened to that podcast that you guys had together. Chris is a good mate of mine, and I think He's an absolutely brilliant podcaster, brilliant human being. And you guys spoke about duality. And It was just funny because I a couple of days before had a conversation with my mates on the podcast about this, the principle of duality, and how you really have to experience a range of emotions and feelings to understand what is on the other side of the spectrum to it, but not only to understand it, to appreciate it. And so I love, hearing your story and hearing about the challenges and the fact that you're on $700 a week. It also foolproofs the advice that you're going to give in the future, because when someone says, oh, but it's not that easy, Frank, because I don't have $1 million bucks in the bank account and I'm not making big money, you can say, well, hey, I was there too. And that gives you so much credibility. And I was writing about this morning.
Sorry, I was just going to say,
you going?
The 700 took a few years to get to. There was 2.5 years there. There was a 2.5 years there where we were on $400 a week. So we started off on 50 grand. We stayed there for like 4 years. Then we sold our apartments, went down to $400 a week for 2 years. Then we went to a time where we had $0 when we were about to go, like we were about on the precipice of bankruptcy. And then we started to, yeah, so I know kind of like all the little versions in between. Like I know what it feels like to have 50 people that you're hiring that they're all on a salary that's double and some to yours. So yes, hopefully that helps my credibility.
Well, it's funny because I get exactly what you mean. The last couple of years, I really sacrificed income to pursue what I loved, and in hindsight, I wish I had been maybe a little bit more disciplined in keeping some cash flow coming in, because it would have made life a little bit easier, and probably allowed me to enjoy the process of doing what I love more consistently instead of stressing about it and
Yeah,
trying to make it dollar productive at times. But I think I'm so grateful for that, because it's taught me a lot of lessons around money and actually created a bit
yeah,
of discipline I didn't have before. But I'll tell you what is, it has been a challenge for me, not out of comparison, but out of maybe a little bit of fear, because the future is always uncertain. I'm 28 now, Frank, and through the period of sort of 26 to 28 years of age, until I've just started making enough money to not stress about rent every week, but just to save a little bit.
yeah,
I remember watching so many people in my life who are the same age as me, and I know a lot of people resonate with this, starting to secure really good corporate jobs, starting to buy their homes, going on big holidays. They were able to start to set their life up in the, I guess what you'd call traditional, not to say that there's anything wrong with it, but that traditional direction of buy a home, you and your partner start to travel and do those things. And when you're gunning towards a dream and trying to make it happen, and there's something that you really believe in, but it's not proving to be successful yet by the balance of your bank account or the kind of life that you can live, there is this fear that if it doesn't work out, I'm a huge step behind everyone else financially. Did you ever resonate with that?
oh yeah. So I pause because I'm just trying to think about it and make sure it's all reality. Like I don't. I think and this is probably one of those, those gifts. So I'm real conscious of certain things are hard work, are intention, et cetera, et cetera. And then there are things that are gifts and luck and timing. And I think one of the gifts is, um, I do have a pretty strong belief in myself, not in like an egotistical maniac kind of way, but in like if I do the thing that is required and I do it consistently and persistently, it'll pay off over time. So if I think about like my podcast today, sometimes I open up the stats. I'm like, oh man, like I need it to be bigger. Like why can't it be bigger? And then I'm like, no, 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 just step back, take the time. It's okay. You're doing the right things. Just put in the reps. And so I think I don't think there was ever a fear that it was all going to be for nothing. And so like again, I probably come back to there's probably a slight like delusion. There's a slight like little delusion there. But I don't think I ever worried that it was going to be for nothing. But did I see people in my life that were, doing the ladder climb and things like that? Absolutely. Like, absolutely. There was every one of my friends earned more money than me for as long as I can remember. Now I'm real lucky that like that meant nothing in our friendship group and means nothing today. So like I have incredible friends and we've been with each other for a lot of them since high school, and so there was never like, ooh, you're not doing as well, or ooh, you're not going to a fancy holiday. Everybody's just like just a normal person, and so none of that changed. But you see it, like you definitely see it, and you definitely know. But I don't think I had the overlay, which is like, oh, will this be for nothing? And maybe I'm intertwining how I feel now, but like the part that won't be the same. So meaning, if it's all in the bin and the bank account doesn't get increased, again, it's back to the person you become along that way. But I think that's probably more from my brain now than I thought at the time. And I think if you told me at year 6 it's in the bin tomorrow, how do you feel? I'm not like, oh, but at least I've become at least become a new guy. I'm like, fucking hell, like there's a lot of effort.
Yeah, and it's funny because I share the same sentiment that you do now, but sometimes I wonder if it's out of almost out of a subconscious effort to make myself feel better about the fact that I'm still figuring it out and it's still not as tangibly successful as I'd like it to be. And that's okay, because as you said, I think people like to knock delusion or knock that blissful naivete. I don't think it's all that bad. If it encourages you to move in a healthy direction, sometimes you need a little bit of it. It's called faith,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and
you
you're
know?
not like proper delusion is like you're not doing the reps, you're not doing the thing. It's like if I'm talking in context now, I open up the podcast and I'm like, why is it not growing? It's like you haven't done an episode in 6 months, bro. And I'm like, don't worry, it'll be huge. I'm like, no, you haven't done anything. It's not going to be huge. So like, yeah, you have to be doing the work to be able to have, I guess, like to have it be not delusion, but more like naivety and optimism. Yeah.
So why did you start the podcast?
Yeah, so it was just a random thought one day. So what happened is I started the process of the cookbook. I decided once doing a bit of research, which was to go through a publisher, I would be giving away something like 70 cents on the dollar. So for every book I sell, I'd be getting 30% or less of it. And I was like, yeah, it doesn't feel right. And I was like, okay, without actually digging into detail what a publisher does, I figured, okay, probably a big part of what they do is like, they're going on the right shelves to create a bit of marketing. And so I was like, okay, well, then I need to do that if I want to self-publish. So then I went, okay, well, what's a great way to market? And I was like, okay, it's social media. So I had to start a personal brand. I had none. I didn't even have Instagram until after we sold the business. So I sold the business and I downloaded Instagram. And then through Instagram, I think I started to realize I was almost getting boxed into a corner, which people started going like, oh, how exciting, like you're doing the cookbook, your food, are you going to be a chef again? Or like, oh, when are you going to open up your restaurant? I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. I was like, whoa, 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 I'm definitely not going to do that. And then I realized, okay, like I am passionate about food. The cookbook is amazing. The recipes are incredible. But I know more about business. Like the reality is I was a chef for 3 years. I've done business for, 12. So I was like, okay, well, why don't I make sure that I can tie the cookbook to the journey I've been on? And I went, okay, great. And so one day I was literally walking down the street and the words chew the fat popped into my head. Sometimes you just have these subconscious moments which are like beautiful. And I was like, oh, chew the fat. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I was like, oh, that sounds like a podcast. I was like, oh, and that makes sense to the cookbook because it's about food. I was like, boom. so I messaged my videographer at the time, Kai, and I said, chew the fat, name of the podcast. We're going to launch it. Let's do it in 2 weeks. And we started and we just started the podcast. And what I realized through that is, you can post on Instagram and TikTok and blah, 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 and you can get lots of views. You can get, a couple 100,000 on a reel. And then you look into the data and you go, someone viewed that for 17 seconds. So on average, the 100,000 times 17 seconds of attention was captured. And I'm like, that's not a lot of time. Do you know what I mean? Like no one really is thinking about you or anything like that. That's why you've got to do it so frequently to actually kind of be in their world. And the reality is like marketing is like a game of attention. It's like when someone's going to buy something, they've got to be thinking about you. So through the podcast, I learned that the numbers aren't as large. They certainly aren't as large for me. They are for the big dogs. But for me, the numbers are much smaller than the Instagram reels that I get. But the attention is so much greater. So like on average, my podcast is anywhere between 45 minutes and an hour. And on average, I'm getting like a 75% retention rate. So the people you're there for, 30 to 40 minutes, they're with you the entire time. And I'm like, oh, that's powerful. So the podcast was really like bringing, the tying it in loosely to the cookbook, which is, hey, the reason this is here is I'm not going to monetize it. I'm not going to have marketing on here. I'm purely doing this because I want to build awareness for the cookbook and the raising $1 million. But it's leveraging the network I've created through business, the business insights, and bringing high performance people from both business and the athletics world and sporting world to kind of share their stories and ultimately it all kind of feeds the funnel, which is your question. Why? It's because more eyes, more cookbooks sold, more impact we can make on the cause.
Yeah, I love it. Have you noticed that, because with the podcast, likely similar to yours, majority of the time that I spend on the show, I'm learning about the guest and learning about their life experience and hearing their insights and their stories. But sometimes when you sit down with a guest and you hear them share their stories and their insights, something clicks and you learn something about yourself in the process. Whether it's that you resonate with something or it seems to make a lot of sense or it's a similarity to what you've experienced, but you couldn't quite put that feeling into words before. I love those moments for me. I wonder what you've learned about yourself in the process of, recording your podcast.
Oof, what have I learned about myself? God. um, I probably the biggest thing I've learned is just like I absolutely love it. You know what I mean? Like I think the part I've learned is the realization that before doing it, before having a weekly cadence of every week I'm sitting down with a new human that I've potentially never met before. The context is my podcast is filmed in my house. I cook for the guest prior their favorite meal, and so we start with their favorite meal. So that's why it's called Chew the Fat. And the moment of them walking in, we have no context of one another. They could have, like I said, sold the business for $1 billion or like Grant Hackett, gold Olympian. And I get to spend 2 hours with them through the process of cooking for them, sitting, sharing a meal, and then having a conversation, realizing like the art of meeting people is lost kind of it was lost in my world because when you go and meet someone and it's like out somewhere or at a networking event, it's all top line, it's all small talk, it's all, it's like not really connecting. But when you're sitting there and you're asking questions, you're actually interacting and actually connecting with someone. The thing I've learned is one, I love it. And number two is like, it is an incredible way to meet people. I was in Melbourne last week, so I caught up with Grant Hackett and had lunch. This week I was in Double Bay, so I had lunch with David Shane. Like 2 weeks ago I was with Fred Best. It's like you actually meeting these people, jamming with them, and then like keeping a relationship going. And there's just so much power in that. And so like I'm now like so pro networking and building that kind of thing because now I'm like, oh no, it's like it feels really natural when you're just sitting there and being super inquisitive with someone.
It's interesting because you said two words there. You said connecting, and that seemed to be the feeling that you felt connected to the guest. Because I feel that, like two of my best mates have come from the podcast, which is amazing. Like it's such a incredible byproduct of sitting down and interview people. But that word networking, I think a lot of people would say that they associate networking with transactional relationships. It's all about what can we get from each other. But it sounds like for you, the networking is far deeper rooted in connection, because to be able to sit down with those guests for lunch and to have those conversations, and I think to share a piece of your life, there's an extra level of vulnerability and connection than there is to networking, because you're sharing truths about your life, you're connecting on the deeper things, you're getting to know that person outside of the context of just their business, because it's the psychology behind it and the human behind it. That's the special thing. And I would almost like, I would encourage people to, I was recently at a work event. It was like a half yearly's award sort of thing. And you can see and hear the networking unfold around you, but you rarely hear, like nobody asked me deep questions or wanted to get to know me or understand me as a human. It was all like very business surface level, which is fine. There's times for that. But I'm always like, what's the one question you can ask that digs a little bit deeper? Or what's the one thing you can share about yourself that encourages them to feel comfortable and dive deeper? That's what I love about this stuff.
I love it. And I'm going to hit you with a question.
It's special.
I want to flip the table and just hit you with a question. This will get you nice and deep. But give me one moment. You know what? When I think about networking these days and you think about that transactional piece, I think about it in the reverse around, more like less so about or nothing about what can they do for me, but it's like more, what can I do for them? So how can I serve them? So that's like part of the piece that people wouldn't know. Part of the reason why I cook for the guest is like, I'm a big believer in like the psychological elements that come into a conversation, come into an introduction. And so part of it for me is when they walk in, my first interaction with them is I'm serving them. I'm doing something for them. I'm in service for them, and to make sure that there's no ego in the room, right? So again, like they see the headline, the guy that sells the business, and you walk in, I'm cooking you a meal. You know what I mean? Like, so like I went to Simon Beard's house in the Gold Coast. First thing I do, I'm in Simon Beard's kitchen. And I'm cooking, and I'm like, oh, would your wife like some food? And now I'm cooking for you and your wife in your kitchen. I'm in service to you.
That's
and I think it's just like this amazingly cool thing that happens because it's like, oh wow, this is like different. So I think about network is like, what can I do for that person, and with no intention to get back. And the reality is, over time, compounding, not from the individual, but over time, things will come back to you.
Bloody oath, I couldn't agree with you more. Karma, the principle of karma.
So here's a question for you. I had it yesterday. I recently joined a board for a charity, and the board's the business well, the charity is called Pro Purpose, and it's got a mission to work with 70,000 businesses across Australia and make generosity simple. So the idea is, every time you give, if you want to set up a charitable entity in your business, it's really hard. It's really complex. It's expensive. You need a board. It's cumbersome. So what ProPurpose does is they've set up all the infrastructure to make it that if you're a business, I want to give, let's say $7,000 a year as my pledge. And so they simplify that process. They give you tools on your website so you can show, like, for every coffee you sell, this is the people you're helping, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I sit on that board with Tim Costello, who's the ex-World Vision CEO. And the chairman, Nick, said the question, which I'll hit at you just because we talk about deep conversations and thought-provoking questions. He said, what's on your gravestone?
I love that question. That's a beautiful question. And, well, my gravestone will be big because I'm a man of many words, Frank. But it certainly will have a tone of, hopefully, loving father, soon to be loving husband. I've just been engaged to my beautiful partner in the last week and a half. And son and brother. My family is the biggest part of my life, mate. I'm so blessed. I wouldn't be alive without my family. I was born with cystic fibrosis, and my mum, my dad and my sister have done the absolute most to give me the opportunity that I have to be the man I am today. So I'm incredibly grateful to them. I'll actually share something with you that I think will be the tone of it. Couple months ago now, we went back to see my partner's family in the country, in Temora, and we had an amazing day out on the farm, driving the tractor, feeding the cows. I got an organic farm, a couple hundred head of cattle, and we're out there. We had an amazing morning. We spent the day having some coffee and catching up and eating some food. And it'd come to night time. We're sitting around a nice fire out in the backyard with the dogs, and we ordered some pizzas from the local pub. And father-in-law and I went down to pick them up, and my partner was sitting there with her mum around the fire. And her mum gave me probably the most beautiful compliment I've ever received in my life. She passed on to Soph. She said, the way that Brad loves the people in his life, I think has made us all better connected as a family and created an extra level of love and connection. That they'd always been a really loving and connected family, but she said, I think it's even deepened that. And I was like, if that's what I'm known for, that the way that I love my people inspired an extra level of depth and connection, mate, that'll do me. That'll make me a very happy and very content man.
That's huge. Far out. Brad, that was good. That was good. That is, wow. That is what a compliment to receive. And also, I love that you just dove straight in there. That's like so good, man.
Mate, it brought me to tears because and like,
tears. That is like the top echelon of compliments to get from the soon-to-be mother-in-law. It's incredible.
oh mate, for sure. And I'm just so aware of, I did an exercise probably a year and a half ago now on the podcast that listeners would be familiar with, where I sat down with those two mates that I go for a run and a coffee with every Wednesday. And for years we've had these incredible chats. These guys that we're so different between the three of us, our backgrounds, the lives that we've lived, they could not be more different when you sit down and you look at the life that we've lived and the kind of blokes that we are. But we have this shared love and connection as mates because of the way that we want to be in the world and the kind of blokes that we show up as. And we'd been having for years like these incredible conversations over coffee. And I just said to the boys after one of our chats one day, I said, you know what? I would love for other blokes our age to hear these conversations, just to know that you can have this level of connection with the mates in your life and that this can be normal, and you can try to dive a little bit deeper over coffee. It doesn't have to be just the same surface level stuff all the time. And there's a time and a place for it, mate. We take the piss out of each other. We joke, we talk about stuff we've seen on social. We have all those conversations, but there is certainly, I'd say, more depth than the average conversation amongst mates. I said, I'd love to have one of these convos on the pod one day. And the boys were like, we're down. If you want to do it, let's do it. But it's your platform, so, sit with it for a bit. And I sat with it and I thought, well, what can we talk about? I don't want to come on and just be three mates bantering because there's plenty of those pods.
Yeah.
And I said to the boys, why don't we pick something that feels like a relevant topic, as they're a little bit older than me. They're, I think, 30, 31, I'm 28. But for guys in their 20s, 30s, let's pick a relevant topic. Let's do some homework on that topic. So let's dive into it. Let's try to understand it. Let's feel it. And then let's come back and report what we've learnt from the homework and share our personal, always very unique experience to the other lads. And they're like, great. And the first task that I gave the boys is I've been watching Chris Hemsworth's documentary on, I think it's Disney or Amazon, one of the two, Limitless. And the last episode of that doco, he was talking about death and preparing for death.
Wow.
And it was so foreign to me because even as a guy who grew up with my condition, and my first doctor told my parents I wouldn't survive my teenage years, that I'd be better off with a terminal illness because this would ruin my life. There was so much negativity from professional sources and from people outside of my circle around what my quality of life would look like. But we always had an adamant belief that my life would be great. But we never really talked about death, or because it's a little bit mundane, and it's almost, death can be almost associated with the idea of giving up. But the truth is, it's actually a very normal part of our life experience, and it's certainly something that as humans we all share, the fact that we will die one day. And I've never believed in this idea of life expectancy, because people say that you have a life expectancy of around 41. With cystic fibrosis, they say that the average person has a life expectancy of 80 years or 4,000 weeks. But I've never seen someone walk into the world with a ticket that they wave around that says, congratulations, here's 80 years, enjoy them. Like, it's so uncertain for all of us. And so I thought, why don't we write our own 2 to 3 minute eulogy as if we're accepting death at, whether it be, for me, I wrote it as if I was accepting death in 24 hours and I had to leave my parting message with the world and reflect on the life that I'd lived. And the boys wrote it almost from, and there was no specificity here, but one of my mates wrote it as if he was 95 and he's got Kanye playing at his funeral and it's a celebration at the end of a long life. My mate Joey wrote it as if he's a middle-aged man, but probably because of my challenges and life experience, I wrote it as a young man.
Yeah.
And for me, it was the most incredible exercise in reflection, in honouring that one day I'm going to die, and in that knowledge, what kind of life do I want to live? So it was far less about death, and it was so much more about life. And in that reflection, I realised, I always knew how important my family was, but I realised it was certainly the most important thing, the relationships I had with the people I love, and being the kind of human being that I want to be for them. And so that is, for me, the centre of my universe. And that's why when you ask that question, it's sitting right there. It's in the heart, all ready to go. So what would you say?
Well, I feel like yours have a lot more depth than mine's going to have. I think I'm going to park the family, the husband, because I want those to be, I guess, the hopefully obvious ones. I think something that sits on my heart is I want to have a net positive impact on as many people as I can in this world, in whatever shape and form. So whether that be motivation, inspiration, driving someone to, do the best they can with the gifts they have. I think, to be remembered as someone who had that as an overall positive impact. Not from the, oh, look at me, I'll be remembered, because I'm pretty honest with myself, you'll be forgotten, but it's more around what that sentiment means, and therefore that is a fulfilling life. I think
Mm-hmm.
that would be something that has impact, because I think that's just part of it, and that's part of why I do the mentoring and coaching of people. Is just there's nothing more special than seeing something in someone that someone doesn't know about themselves, and then helping it grow, and then they believe in themselves, and then they make a positive impact, and thinking about that a tree, and the tree, and the apple tree, and it falls down and there's seeds everywhere, and you don't know which one of those are going to turn into trees, but they're going to, and the ripple effect that has on the world. It's recently I reached out to find out how can I talk at universities when or high schools, how can I help shape and provide encouragement to like the younger generation to be able to go like, you know, because I mean that's like kind of gap where I'm still young enough. I'm 31 that I don't look like just that old dude that's coming to the coming in there like yeah I'll never touch that. But like the idea of like going there and like inspiring someone at that like right crossroads in their life, and then they have a positive impact, and then like the ripples that creates, that shit jazzes me up. So something like that.
Well, mate, I'll give you a compliment and say that you're absolutely living that purpose, because the generosity of heart to do what you're doing with the cookbook and to do what you're doing here today, to sit here, you certainly don't have to be here. There's far more upside for me having Frank Greeff on the podcast than there is for you having to sit here and listen to Brad Driver waffle. So I'm very grateful for that, and you'll certainly resonate with Jay Shetty.
I know of. I don't know. Yes.
So Jay Shetty, I personally don't know him either. let me say that, but I've loved some of his work over the years. I actually haven't listened to the guy in a while, but one thing that's always resonated with me is his thoughts around purpose. And I have two thoughts and two beliefs around purpose. The first of which has been inspired by him, and it's ask yourself these two questions: what am I passionate about? And secondly, how can I use that passion in service of other people? And I've certainly linked that to what I do on the podcast, firstly with a passion to connect and share stories, and to use those stories to uplift and inspire hope in other people who are going through challenges or hardships in their life, or at least maybe just looking for that next level or that next thing that excites them. And then also the work of Mel Robbins. I heard her once say that we all have a shared purpose to live our most authentic expression of self. And I think that's a beautiful one too, and I certainly resonate with both of those. So I'm sure though that what you're doing is helping so many people. I'm so grateful for your time today, mate. Any leaving messages or words that you want to leave the audience with?
Nah, just a shout out, Brad. You're doing good. You're doing some incredible things. I'm hoping, and I actually trust in my gut that it's making a super positive impact. I don't. I haven't. I mean, I don't. It's not that I don't think I haven't had a conversation where someone is as willing to get vulnerable as you, and I think that's a really, really positive message and impact for young men. And again, I speak from the behalf of young men because I am one. Can't speak on behalf of anybody else. So good on you, man. Like good stuff. It's been awesome.
I appreciate it a lot, brother, and I'll make sure that we link the cookbook in the show notes. So if anyone wants to jump on and support the book, is it out yet?
It's not. It's currently with the printers, so it'll be launching in the first week of November. So if anybody's interested, jump on the podcast, Chew the Fat, or jump on my Instagram, Frank Greeff.
Mate, awesome. I'll make sure they're all linked. Thanks so much, brother.
Good man. Thanks, Brad.